Let's unpack this. We are plunging headfirst into an extraordinary and really complex narrative. It's this whole web of family secrets, brutal crime that stretches across nearly 3 decades. Our source material today details the life and investigations of a local journalist, a guy named Philip Dryden. And we're tracing how just one horrific event in 1976 sets all the dominoes falling. It leads to this shocking series of events and murders that just erupt almost 30 years later in the East Anglian Fens.
This is a remarkable deep dive because the entire story is built on a single monumental lie. A lie told in a moment of absolute crisis.
Right.
And our mission is to take you through the 2 timelines, the past and a present for these characters, and show how they inevitably collide. We're going from the visceral heat of a 1976 air crash to the claustrophobic darkness of a Second World War bunker in 2003. It's a study in intergenerational deceit, profound loss, and ultimately these really disastrous acts of parental love.
And crucially, you have to understand the setting. I mean, the East Anglian Fens are less a landscape and more of a mood.
Oh, absolutely.
If you've never been, it's just this vast, flat, watery expanse. It was historically a marsh. Now it's a patchwork of drainage ditches and this black bone-dry peat soil. It's flat as a pancake, and it's just dominated by these massive open skies.
The sources describe the Fens as a character unto itself, often a really unsettling one. It's a place where things are easily concealed, whether it's underwater or buried deep in the peat.
Yeah.
And we see these recurring themes of suffocating heat, intense drought, and a surprising feeling of claustrophobia, which is strange, right? It contrasts so sharply with those wide-open horizons.
It is strange. It's like the sky is pressing down on you.
Exactly. It's a land of secrets, and as our material shows, those secrets always eventually resurface, and often violently.
So we're focusing on 2 interlocking tragedies that really define Philip Dryden's world. First, the long-buried secret stemming from the Black Bank air crash in 1976.
And second, the modern-day chaos it triggers in 2003. A brutal, complex murder investigation that ropes in illegal immigration rackets, historic wartime bunkers, a pornography ring, and it has these surprising connections right back to the U.S. military base at Mildenhall.
Wow.
If you want a shortcut to understanding how historical trauma can fuel contemporary crime, this is it. These 2 mysteries, separated by decades, are intrinsically dependent on each other for their ultimate devastating resolution.
Let's start at the beginning then. The disaster that created the foundation for everything that follows. The date is Tuesday, June 1st, 1976. And we really need to emphasize that this was during the peak of the infamous Great Drought.
The environmental conditions are so key here. They made the area uniquely vulnerable. The peat fields east of Ely were so utterly dehydrated that it created a genuine meteorological hazard, a massive red dust storm.
A dust storm in England.
In England. The sources vividly describe it as a tumbling cauldron of dust that drifted across the region, casting the strange amber shadow even over the ancient Ely Cathedral. Visibility was almost non-existent.
And it was into this cauldron that Flight MH336 lifted off. The plane was carrying military personnel and dependents departing from the U.S. military base at Mildenhall. What makes this so tragic is that light aircraft at nearby Cambridge had already been grounded because of the weather warnings. But Mildenhall proceeded.
Mildenhall just proceeded with the flight on schedule.
It was a clear operational failure, and it was just hugely exacerbated by the terrible conditions. The flight essentially flew blind into the dust storm. The crash occurred instantly at Black Bank Farm. The impact itself was, of course, catastrophic, but the second stage was what truly sealed the fate of most of the victims.
The fire?
The fire. 50,000 gallons of kerosene turned instantly to gas, resulting in a monumental fireball. The air, which was already dry and hot from the drought, it just crackled with unimaginable heat. 12 people died that night. The tragedy wiped out a UK family residing at the farm. William, Celia, and their infant son, Matthew Burpeck. They were killed immediately inside the farmhouse. Among the U.S. citizens killed were the pilot, Captain Jack Rigby, Major Jim Koskinski, his wife Marlene, and their own 2-week-old baby boy, Lyndon.
The initial death toll was shocking, and it immediately grabbed national headlines. But here's the crucial context that shapes the cover-up that followed.
This was 1976.
This was 1976. The Cold War was at its height. The sources make it really clear that while the press covered the disaster extensively, it was front-page news for every major broadsheet. The coverage was notably objective. It carefully avoided outright criticism of the U.S. Air Force.
They were a key ally.
They were an essential strategic ally. Nobody wanted to rock that boat.
So amidst all the melted fuselage and the black twisted wreckage, the searchers find only two people alive. Maggie Beck, who was just 16, and a baby.
And Maggie carried the physical memory of that inferno for the rest of her life. Her hair had singed. The sources described the black hanging threads turning to ash-white corkscrews, and a lock of that burning hair ignited. It left a livid, corkscrew-shaped scar across her cheek. She was left with what the sources call a lifetime to feel that pain.
And it's the secret Maggie walked out with, carrying that baby, that becomes the foundation of the whole story. This is the moment of the crucial lie.
She made a terrible instant decision in the wreckage. Maggie told the authorities that her own infant son, Maddie, had perished with her parents. She claimed instead that she had managed to save the Koskinskis' 2-week-old baby, Lyndon.
But how, in that chaos, that's an incredible thing to think of doing. And to cement the deception, she let her secret teenage lover, Maddie's father, believe the dead child was the American boy?
Yes. She briefly pulled back the blanket to show the USAF stenciled on the linen, just for a second.
That is it's cold, even in the shock of a crash. She's consciously presenting her own dead son as the American victim and giving her live son to the American family. How is she able to pull this off, given all the military involvement? Surely there was an autopsy or medical records, anything.
This is where the context of trauma and, frankly, military bureaucracy comes into play. The sheer scale of the disaster meant immediate priority was placed on victim identification and repatriation. The surviving baby, the one Maggie claimed was Lyndon, was checked over and found to have a slight head injury.
Okay.
But the sources later confirmed two things that really aided the lie. One, Maddie and Lyndon were roughly the same age, only a few days apart, and they were similar in coloring and weight.
So physically interchangeable to a stranger.
Pretty much. And two, and this is perhaps more important, the base medic who had delivered Lyndon, who could have made an immediate, irrefutable verification, he had already left the country.
So they were dealing with secondary evidence, and they were relying on the word of a deeply traumatized, scarred survivor.
Precisely. And this lie was instantly solidified. The Koskinski grandparents, James Sr. and Gail, they immediately flew over from Texas. They were shown holding their grandson, Lyndon, at a photo call at Mildenhall. It was this deeply grieving but grateful image that went out to the world.
So they took custody of the child and the two coffins carrying their son and daughter-in-law, and they flew home. They genuinely believed Maggie Beck was a hero who had saved their grandson.
Absolutely.
And in one devastating, self-sacrificing moment, Maggie Beck gave her own child away. She condemned herself to a lifetime of silence, while Maddie Beck, now Lyndon Koskinski, gained a new name, a new identity, and a new life in Texas.
It's the ultimate sacrificial act, but it's also the ultimate betrayal of trust. Maggie never saw her son again until he reappeared almost 3 decades later, which is what sets the stage for the next part of our dive.
Right, so let's jump forward. It's now 2003, 27 years after the crash, and we meet the man who's going to be our guide through all this complexity, Philip Dryden. Dryden's a fascinating character, a former, hotshot Fleet Street reporter who's landed as the chief reporter for the local paper, The Crow. And he's juggling his work with a profound, crippling personal crisis.
And that crisis it's existential. It centers entirely on his wife, Laura. She's been in a coma for nearly 4 years since the Harrimer drain car accident. Dryden was driving their 2-door Corsa when it plunged into 20 feet of water in a roadside dike. He managed to escape, but Laura, trapped in the back seat, was left behind.
That is just a crushing burden, surviving an accident while being haunted by whether you left your wife behind. How did that personal catastrophe inform his professional investigation?
It provides his driving motivation and his intense empathy. He is absolutely consumed by guilt. He lives with the question of whether he simply fled the nightmare of the underwater cell. This trauma defines him as a character. It makes him obsessively search for truths that are concealed, whether they're buried secrets from 1976 or, clues in his wife's brain. He views himself as perhaps doomed to spend his life beside a hospital bed, waiting for messages from another world.
And the hospital itself is a key location here. He visits Laura daily in the Tower Hospital, a name that really emphasizes its position. It's situated on Ely's only hill, a precious 100 feet above the flat fens. It's literally his anchor in this world of flatness and deception.
And this is where we encounter the deeply frustrating, yet incredibly important technological connection he has to his wife, the compass machine.
Right. Tell us about that.
It's an alphabet grid displayed on a screen. Laura controls it via a small electronic trigger, and she's relying on these tiny muscle movements, tremors, for a timed response.
So this isn't just a simple communication device. It's a torturous process of patience and interpretation. The neurologist explained to Dryden that extracting a coherent message was about as easy as playing a difficult game of chess in your head while lying paralyzed.
Exactly. Her messages are halting, disjointed, and often surreal. They demand immense concentration and filtering on Dryden's part. We see messages like LAURA or my hair or even the cryptic SHHFT Rosa.
Yeah.
He has to sit there, channel her energy, just waiting to see if she'll emerge from what the sources call the confused penumbra of coma to deliver something meaningful. It's an exercise in hope and despair simultaneously.
Okay, now the trigger for the entire modern investigation happens right there,
Yeah.
in that hospital room. Maggie Beck, the woman who survived the 1976 crash and told the big lie, she's in the bed next to Laura's. And Maggie had moved in with Dryden's mother after the great floods of 1977 and the presumed drowning of Dryden's father.
Right, so there's a deep family connection. And Maggie is now gravely ill with terminal cancer. She's described as a big woman with farmyard bones and that livid corkscrew burn across her face, carrying a lifetime of grief. But her primary concern isn't her lie, not initially. It's her daughter, Estelle. Maggie feels this profound sense of failure regarding Estelle and wants Dryden to find her, as Estelle had gone touring along the coast with an American friend.
So Dryden, already consumed by his own guilt and his waiting game with Laura, takes on this urgent mission. He starts placing appeals through Radio Littleport, desperately trying to locate Estelle.
She held Dryden's hand and made him keep a solemn promise. "Promise me they'll come," she said, before she could reveal her secret. And Dryden felt this promise bound him not just to Maggie, but maybe to his own absent father's memory. He's doing everything, police alerts, radio ads, but Estelle remains elusive.
But just as Maggie is fading, a key figure reappears, which adds this massive tension to the scene. Lyndon Koskinski.
Lyndon arrives. He's now a major in the U.S. Air Force, stationed at Mildenhall. And remarkably, he'd kept in touch with Maggie's family over the years, but he arrives bearing his own immense trauma. He had been shot down in Iraq and spent 4 weeks imprisoned in al-Rashid, which he and his fellow prisoners called the Baghdad Hilton. His co-pilot, Captain Freeman White, was imprisoned right alongside him.
Wow. So that just brings the Cold War history crashing into the modern military landscape. Lyndon, the U.S. pilot who was raised as a hero's orphan, returns deeply traumatized and emotionally detached, only to find his biological mother dying.
The timing is just incredible. Maggie manages to gather Dryden, Estelle, who finally returns, and Lyndon at her bedside. The date is Friday, June 13th, 2003, which just emphasizes the ominous nature of this revelation. In her final moments, with visible physical effort, she delivers the single, definitive, and devastating line: "I lied."
The great reveal. The whole purpose of this deep dive unfolds right there. She confesses that she swapped the children. The boy who survived the fire was flown to Texas and was raised as Lyndon Koskinski is, in truth, her son, Maddie Beck.
And the American child, the real Lyndon Koskinski, is the one buried under Maddie's name at St. Matthew's Church in Black Bank.
Oh my God. The emotional fallout must have been immediate.
It was. Estelle realizes the grave she's been tending for 2 decades holds a stranger, and she suddenly has a brother who is an American fighter pilot. And Lyndon, who spent his entire life venerating the image of a father he never knew, realizes he's a fraud. His whole identity as a heroic orphan is a fabrication.
And the sources show his internal conflict immediately, don't they? Dryden records him saying, "I'm a U.S. pilot. That's my life. This doesn't change anything, shouldn't change anything."
Right, but internally, he admits to feelings of anger, confusion, being profoundly cheated. His whole self-perception is just shattered by this 27-year-old lie, and this is what sets him on a dark, destructive path.
Yeah, and we need to remember this shift. Dryden, while dealing with his wife's coma, is now simultaneously reporting on a story where the central figure, the man whose identity was stolen, is a decorated U.S. major who has just found out his entire life is a deception. The stage is now set for an investigation that is part personal, part historical, and very soon, part criminal.
Exactly.
Okay, so now we have to shift gears completely and look at the second parallel universe that Dryden is investigating, which is going to inevitably collide with these family secrets. This is where Inspector Newman, who has this, cynically useful relationship with Dryden, Newman got the tips and Dryden got a story, draws the reporter into a gruesome modern investigation.
The initial clue is disturbing. It's a collection of illicit X-rated photographic prints found in a large brown envelope. The photos show a young blonde girl with glazed eyes, clearly suggesting she was drugged. And with her is a professional, smooth, cruel-faced man.
It's the location that Dryden immediately fixates on, though. The room in the photographs is bare concrete, with layers of decades-old graffiti and straw scattered on the floor. But crucially, the sources note it has walls but no right angles. This is the distinctive feature that allows Dryden to identify it as a Second World War pillbox.
And this detail just opens up the historical context of the Fens again. These pillboxes were built in 1940 under a covert plan called Operation Ironside. The defensive strategy was chillingly simple. In the event of a German invasion, the Fens would be deliberately flooded, turning the Isle of Ely into an isolated command headquarters. About 150 of these concrete structures were built to guard the crucial high ground.
And they can identify this specific one.
Yeah, by a faint stenciled number, 103, marking it as being within the Isle of Ely area.
So a historical structure built for military defense against invasion is now being repurposed as a scene for modern crime and degradation. The victim is identified as Alice Sutton. She confesses she was drugged, a date rape drug mixed with vodka by the man at the Pine Tree Pub where she worked to save money for university. She was taken to the pillbox, and she described it as terrifying and inherently claustrophobic, despite the flat fields outside.
And the investigation immediately explodes into a much wider criminal network. The photographic prints weren't found randomly. They were discovered during a police raid targeting illegal immigrants in the Midlands. This establishes the clear and sinister link between the local pornography ring and a major people smuggling operation that's centered in the Fens.
Let's delve into that smuggling side because it is a vital layer of the story. The Fens are serving as a critical drop-off and transport point. Dryden gets a tip from Eddie, a local Molly dancer who lives on a narrow boat.
Right. And Eddie tells Dryden she witnessed lines of immigrants moving almost like a chain gang being decanted from lorries at the Ritz lay-by. They were then forced across Black Bank Fen overland. It paints this picture of intense, orchestrated exploitation right on the flat, exposed landscape.
And this is where we meet Jimmy Cabazzo, a foreman at Wilkinson's celery shed, who employs many immigrant workers. Cabazzo is in an agonizing wait. He paid the smugglers to bring his young son, Emmy, across, expecting him to be dropped off by a specific driver named Winston, who is described as a skinhead. Jimmy's emotional investment is just immense. He's a desperate father trying to reunite his fragmented family.
So the pressure cooker is building. Dryden, following up on the tips about the pillbox located in Monswood on Black Bank Fen, finds the Ritz lay-by tea bar closed and investigates the site himself. He enters the abandoned pillbox and is assaulted, passes out.
And when he wakes up, the whole narrative turns gruesome. He finds a body manacled to the wall. The victim is Johnnie Roe, the proprietor of the Ritz lay-by tea bar, the man central to both the people smuggling and the porn ring.
And the pathologist's report on Johnnie Roe's death adds a specific chilling layer of psychological torture. Roe was secured to the wall, but he didn't die from the initial blows or the blow that knocked Dryden out. He died of extreme, agonizing dehydration. His skin was dry, parched, discolored. The physical trauma, a blow to the head that forced cartilage into the brain, was severe but not immediately fatal.
But wait, how could he die of thirst in a room where someone was clearly just present?
This is the Tantalus clue, and it is profoundly cruel. An empty, polished glass of water was found on a shelf, deliberately placed just out of Johnnie Roe's reach.
Oh, wow.
The classical allusion is clear. He was tortured like Tantalus, the mythological figure doomed to stand in water that receded when he tried to drink and under fruit that lifted when he reached for it. It speaks to a killer with both immense physical strength and a deeply rooted psychological need for retribution.
Initially, the trail points directly to Bob Sutton's vengeance. Sutton, Alice's father, was an ex-military police officer and a transport security specialist. He's a man with the capability and the motivation.
Right. Sutton discovered the horrific photos of his daughter through his police contacts. He was incandescent with rage. He learned the pornography trade was centered around the laybys. So he went out on Saturday night and confronted Johnnie Roe at the pillbox. Sutton's wife later found a bloodied handkerchief, and police confirmed Sutton's fingerprints were inside the structure. He certainly started the assault, driven by father's protective fury.
So this is the first example of a father's love driving violent action. But the story gets infinitely more complicated. The body count rises. Bob Sutton himself becomes a second murder victim. And the investigation ultimately fingers Jimmy Cabazzo, the desperate celery shed foreman, for both Sutton's murder and the murder of Winston Edgley, the driver.
Yes, and Cabazzo's confession is a study in agonizing mental distress. He initially found Bob Sutton, mistakenly believing Sutton was connected to the loss and subsequent death of his son Emmy, but his actions concerning Roe are truly complex. Cavazzo confirms he saw Sutton assaulting Roe in the pillbox, but Cavazzo found Roe alone afterwards, dying of thirst and still manacled, and he was just enraged that Roe, who was involved in the entire smuggling chain, had failed to uphold the simple bargain of delivering his son. So Cavazzo left him the empty glass on the shelf as a final, bitter punishment before walking away and leaving Roe to die.
So Cavazzo didn't deliver the fatal blow, but he delivered the final, psychologically devastating one by sealing Roe's fate with the empty glass. This weaves the modern crime line, the pornography and smuggling, directly into the desperate actions of fathers.
Exactly. And while the police are untangling these multiple murders connected to the pillbox, Dryden is simultaneously working on the family secret, trying to deal with the increasingly unstable Lyndon.
Right. He starts by trying to confirm the 1976 lie with the authorities. He interviews Major August Sondheim, who is the USAF public relations officer, and Captain Freeman White, Lincoln's co-pilot from the Baghdad Hilton days, at Mildenhall.
And August confirms that Maggie's deception was, well, technically possible in 1976. As we discussed, Maddie and Lyndon were near identical in age and size, and crucially, the medic who had verifiable records of Lyndon's birth was gone.
But what about that blood type mismatch you mentioned? That seems like a massive, unmissable red flag.
It was a massive flag, and it provides a critical insight into the cover-up. The surviving baby was given a transfusion for a slight head injury. When the blood type didn't match the Koskinski parents' records, the official internal explanation was that it was a simple, understandable medical error in the chaos of the crash response.
A medical error.
Remember the Cold War context? Nobody wanted to question the integrity of a hero survivor like Maggie, nor did the USAF want to delay handing a child back to grieving, high-profile grandparents. It was just swept under the rug as an administrative mistake to protect the perceived narrative.
Incredible. A cover-up rooted in political expediency and, I guess, tragic goodwill. Meanwhile, the trauma catches up with the victim of the lie. Lyndon Koskinski goes AWOL from Mildenhall. He takes his newly found half-sister Estelle's Land Rover, and he just vanishes, unable to process the reality of his stolen identity.
At the same time, the people smuggling narrative resolves itself with devastating finality. Jimmy Cavazzo's desperate hope is crushed when his son, Emmy, is found dead at Sedgefen Processing Works, these old grain silos. He'd been shot in the head with a high-caliber rifle. Cavazzo, having waited so long, found Winston Edgley, the skinhead driver at the silos, and in a fit of absolute despair, murdered him.
And, as we established, he also admits to his role in Johnnie Roe's death. Cavazzo was motivated by the sheer mental agony of a father betrayed by the very men he paid to save his son. His actions really define the deep cost of exploitation in the fence.
So the focus now swings back to Maggie. Dryden has to solve the driving question. Why did Maggie give her son away? He needs the full picture of Maggie's motive, and he starts by tracking down the man Maggie stipulated would inherit 5,000 pounds in her will, the man claiming to be Maddie's natural father.
And the trail leads Dryden to Johnnie Roe's ex-wife, Sally Roe, who drops the second great bombshell of the narrative.
A huge one. Johnnie Roe was Maddie Beck's father.
Wow, okay, so that changes everything.
Everything. This is stunning. It explains why Johnnie, Maggie's secret teenage lover, ran into the fire to save the baby. He wasn't trying to save the American child. He was trying to save his son.
This is a major structural shift in the story. Maggie's entire lie was built on protecting her son Maddie from the influence of his father, who she knew was a bad man.
And the true, horrifying depth of Maggie's motive is revealed when Dryden interviews Constance Tompkins, Maggie's former housekeeper. Constance explains that Maggie's love affair with Johnnie led to pregnancy. But before the crash, Maggie found evidence that just destroyed her trust in him.
And the evidence was?
Devastating. Maggie found photographs of Johnnie making love to other girls, and then, critically, one of herself, confirming he was involved in the illicit photography and pornography trade that he later ran out of the Ritz lay-by. Maggie realized the full extent of his moral corruption.
So this changes the interpretation of Maggie's act entirely. Her final, desperate action wasn't just about saving Maddie from the physical fire of the air crash. It was about saving him from the moral disfigurement of his father's life.
Exactly. She feared Johnnie would abuse Maddie or suck him into that sordid life, and she made the instant high-stakes decision to swap him for the safe, clean American baby.
It's an act of profound possessive love built on a foundational lie.
It highlights the central tragedy. She condemned herself to a life of sorrow and her son to a false identity, all to protect him from a fate she found unbearable. Her final letter to Dryden even talked explicitly about the disfigurement she caused with her lie, and her desire for Maddie's father, who she didn't name but identified as the 5,000-pound beneficiary, to come forward now that the truth was revealed. She was trying to right multiple wrongs simultaneously, even from the grave.
So as the truth of the two timelines, the family secret and the modern crime spree, converge, we return to the Tower Hospital and to Laura. Against all odds, the compass machine starts to deliver crucial information. It's signaling that Laura, though comatose, has been actively processing the world around her.
Yeah, she sends the message. The whistles. This is a significant breakthrough because it's coherent and it points to a location. But earlier, she had also sent tapes a quarter. And Dryden realizes that Maggie's confession tapes, the ones Estelle and Lyndon thought they had destroyed after hearing Johnnie Roe was the father, had been taken. Laura, the silent witness, had observed who took them.
So Dryden finds Maggie's last cassette. And when he plays it, it reveals yet another deep secret of the family.
Estelle was adopted. Maggie and her husband, Donald, could not conceive after the trauma of the air crash. Maggie loved Estelle like her own, but this revelation breaks the final biological link Estelle had to the initial tragedy, yet it binds her to Maggie's profound choice to replace her lost son.
And the location of the final confrontation is now key. Dryden finally tracks the AWOL Lyndon Koskinski and Estelle's Land Rover to a new, isolated house on Adventurer's Fen. And here's a twist of poetic tragedy. This house was one Laura had secretly built years ago with money held in a trust. It was intended as a surprise home for their future family, a future now denied.
A house of broken dreams.
Yeah.
And this is where Lyndon, the true Maddie Beck, is hiding. Dryden confronts him. Lyndon confesses that he was the motorcyclist harassing Dryden, trying to intimidate the reporter covering his mother's death. But more chillingly, he confesses to the torture of Johnnie Roe in the pillbox.
So he did it.
He tracked down Roe, manacled him to the wall, and delivered the ultimate reveal. "I'm your son." He detailed the psychological and physical torture, forcing Roe to confess his sins. He was intending to make his biological father suffer for the life he had stolen from him, the life of decency and peace Maggie had tried to buy for Maddie. Lyndon admits hitting him hard, breaking his nose, but insists he had only left him to die of thirst as a punishment fitting his father's moral crimes.
And the ultimate tragic climax is initiated by a massive lightning storm that sets the isolated adventurer's Fen house ablaze. Dryden runs to find Lyndon.
Lyndon, having confessed to Dryden, chooses his ending. He commits suicide by setting the house on fire using his Zippo lighter and petrol. And the last thought he clings to is the vengeance he achieved. He died thinking he'd killed Johnnie Roe, thinking he died of thirst.
But the source material leaves us with a painful ambiguity around Roe's death, doesn't it? Estelle later confirms to Dryden that she also visited Johnnie Roe after Lyndon's confrontation. She witnessed his agony, that tortured like Tantalus description, but she didn't help him. She let him die of thirst, believing he deserved it for his abuse of Alice Sutton and others.
Right, this is the final layer of tragedy. When Dryden confronts her with the pathologist's finding that Johnnie Roe died from the initial beating, the cartilage forced into his brain, not from thirst, she doesn't deny her neglect. She just expresses profound regret that she didn't communicate with Lyndon earlier. It suggests that they both sought a vengeance that ultimately didn't even align with the true cause of death.
And Dryden, caught in the inferno, is badly burned, but he survives. He refuses to repeat the failure of Haremere Drain. He uses the cold metal chub lock of the house door, the key for which he wore around his neck, as a physical point of focus, the antithesis of the fire. And he's shouting, "I'll be back to Laura." He dragged himself out, living to tell the story.
And now, for the postscript and the consequences. The web of criminal and family deceit finally closes. Jimmy Cavazzo pleaded guilty to manslaughter for the murders of Winston Edgley and Bob Sutton, citing his state of agonizing mental distress over the loss of Emmy. He was deported to Nigeria to serve a 10-year concurrent sentence, while his son Emmy was buried in an unmarked grave back in the Fens.
The wider criminal network faced justice too. Peter Selby, the professional porn stud, was charged and convicted of aggravated rape and indecent assault, taking 83 similar charges into account. He was later murdered in prison with a Stanley knife, the killer never identified. The darkness that plagued the Fens was dealt with violently, but effectively.
And Captain Freeman White, the co-pilot and suspected motorcyclist who had harassed Dryden and potentially assisted Lyndon's AWOL status, was released due to insufficient evidence regarding Bob Sutton's death. He was discharged from the USAF and used his military pension to open a motorcycle repair business in Austin, Texas. He just slipped back into a quiet life.
And what of Philip Dryden and Laura, the emotional anchor of this entire deep dive? While Dryden recovers from his severe burns, the compass machine produces a final, clear, and perfectly timed message. It resolves the narrative of his own personal tragedy. I love you. The house Laura built was a financial symbol of their future together, and the message is a symbol of forgiveness and hope.
So we've tracked this incredible confluence of events. What does this all mean when we step back? This deep dive showed us how three distinct tragedies, the 1976 air crash, Dryden's trauma at Harrimer Grain, and the modern people smuggling racket, were tragically bound together by the destructive actions of three fathers.
It is truly a study in trauma and the desperate boundaries of possessive love. Johnnie Roe ran into a literal fire to save his son Matty, only to corrupt the life he was trying to save him from. Bob Sutton sought violent vengeance and died trying to protect his daughter Alice's dignity. And Jimmy Caviezel committed murder in his absolute despair over the loss of his son Emmy. All these crimes stemmed from men trying desperately, disastrously to protect or save their children in a world of betrayal and deceit.
And the fens, this flat, bleak, and watery landscape, held these secrets for 27 years, only to have them resurface violently in fire, in water, and in red dust. And Philip Dryden, the persistent journalist consumed by his own guilt and searching for truth in his wife's silence, finally found love, clarity, and a future home, proving that even a life built on profound loss can be rebuilt.
The provocative thought this entire journey leaves us with centers entirely on Maggie Beck's final, desperate act. She gave her son a new life, free from the moral disfigurement of his father, but in doing so, she condemned him to an identity built on a lie, a life of profound loneliness. And when Lyndon, or Matty, finally found the truth and confronted his father, he took a path more tragic than the one she initially feared.
That leads to the core question. How much of our fundamental identity is shaped by the family we have versus the family we imagine we should have? And if we look at Maggie's sacrifice, can an act of selfless love built on a foundational lie ever truly be forgiven or undone by the generations that follow? It's a tragedy where every character was ultimately destroyed, or nearly destroyed, by an act they believed was rooted in love. Something for you to ponder as you look out at the horizon.